I'm gonna do a little sound check here and see if I can keep my fan on. Um, my name is Nathan Kelley. I'm doing my informative speech for public speaking with Professor Voss. Um, Doing this speech, a little change. It's on the Battle of the Bulge as opposed to um, the psychology way that I was going to go. So here we go. What I'm going to be talking about here. Battle of the Bulge is one of the final battles that took place in World War II. It's where Hitler decided that he needed to have a last ditch effort, if you will, and go out the American lines, trying to get to Antwerp. Um, reasons that America was not prepared for this attack, the point at which Hitler decided to pull the trigger, what made him decide to pull the trigger, and then the turn of the battle and why that battle changed. So, the beginning of all this, General Patton, General Eisenhower, and General Bradley, the three primary generals that were involved in this particular offensive, defensive. Um, Eisenhower's back at the rear. He was very strategic, very good at managing his people and managing his men and being able to control them where he needed them to go. General Patton was very much more of a aggressive, in your face type general. He didn't really care whether you were hurt or emotionally damaged. He actually was pulled back from the fronts and put in the rear because during a different battle, he was in the rear and at a hospital, and there were a couple of soldiers that were injured and were struggling with shell shock, basically, and he called them malingerers and proceeded to beat them for being cowards. So they punished him by moving him to the back. But General Patton, General Eisenhower, felt that he needed to be closer to the front. Um, Kept him somewhat close, but not right up front. So Bradley, General Bradley, was the one that was in charge of the troops that were up here in east of um, Shanghai and Vostokny. Those were the important ones that withheld the roads and getting up to Antwerp. Antwerp being the hub, the main port city along with that. So one of the reasons that the Americans were very unprepared for this particular attack is that all the battles they've won, everything that they've won, all the advances that they've made since D-Day, basically winning almost everything as they went across Europe. They were bringing in celebrities. The USO was bringing in celebrities to entertain the troops, and even one of them was a German native, but very much an American. But being a beautiful woman as well as a good singer, she was even making jokes and taking stabs at Hitler because I was saying the reason Hitler was all mad and was doing what he was doing is because he couldn't perform in bed, which made that quite funny. And it always, of course, made the troops and all the men up front chuckle and laugh at that. So that created a substantial sense of confidence and almost arrogance with the Americans, which, Americans are, especially military, are very good at being arrogant and cocky and confident. That's just kind of what we do. So Bradley was actually back in Paris visiting Eisenhower on this particular morning because Eisenhower had just been promoted to a five-star general, and so he was back celebrating and congratulating his friend on that. So the morning of December 16th at 05:30, the Germans unloaded a major barrage and an offensive against the American lines right smack in the middle. And for about 90 minutes, they continued to hammer at them, breaking the center of the line and then allowing the 5th Panther Division and thousands of troops to just basically pound right through and walk right through. And that created a substantial bulge in the American front line, hence the name Battle of the Bulge, um, also known as the Battle of Antwerp. So, as this was taking place, the reason that they did this morning was the dead of winter, December, snow on the ground, and for the next 10 days after December 16th, the forecast was heavy fog and heavy cloud coverage, overcast. So the Americans were not able to do any type of air offensive and have any kind of counterattack. So this is why Hitler felt this time was the time to do this. So in doing this, creating this massive bulge, once it got to a certain point to where they kind of stalled out, but they were still winning, Hitler had a colonel, Colonel Lucini. He ended up, because they were so in depth in the lines, he started to infiltrate German soldiers who were fluent in English and speaking American in American uniforms, were then infiltrating into our ranks and into the American army and causing massive chaos and seriously having them. They were cutting telephone lines, they were doing murders, they were spreading rumors, and they were just creating substantial chaos. Furthermore, a particular rumor that spread that Lucini himself was going to be heading to Paris to actually assassinate Eisenhower, and that, which he wasn't, but that caused substantial chaos in around Eisenhower and basically caused him to be quarantined, if you will. Once that started to create that chaos, he also then took another German, SS Colonel Piper. He was the leader of the 5th Panther Division, the Panther tanks. So his reputation was for sheer terror and death and destruction. He decided he would go into villages, and in these villages just flat burn them to the ground with civilian women and children in there as well. So he'd earned the title Blowtorch Battalion. During one of these besieges, they captured 125 American troops because he felt that when this took place, as they were continuing on to St. Vite, it was causing them to slow down. They weren't able to move as fast as they needed to. So doing this and having this realization, he decided that let's just turn the weapons, and he actually just unloaded on all of these Americans, killing 84 of them. As American troops advanced behind them to try and catch up with them and take back their lines, they come across these 84 Americans, and they are frozen with their arms up in the air as if they were surrendering, realizing that they were just executed right there and left to freeze in the snow. This spread very quickly through the ranks of the American troops and really boosted morale, if you will, causing them to want revenge and want to avenge their comrades that had died and the way they died. On December 21st, as this 5th Panther Division goes into St. Fife, they capture 8,000 American troops and actually take the city. And in taking this city, it was their first really big victory in the offensive that they have. Once they have this, they want to keep the ball rolling, and they use that momentum. They want to go after Bastogne. Bastogne is a crucial town in this particular layout because there are 7 roads that create a substantial hub for supply lines and everything to get into Germany through St. Vite and anywhere else in Belgium. So as the Americans were trying to hold their ground there in Bastogne, there is a corporal. His name is Keith Davis. He was of the 16th Field Artillery, a true American hero and a true patriot and one of the most honorable men I've ever heard talk about with these things. But he talked about coming up across a rock wall and being so cold it was negative 12 degrees as they were surrounded by this Panther battalion. And he walked up, there's this rock wall, and he was looking for some extra gloves, and he found some gloves, and he pulled the gloves off the wall, and as he went to put them on, there were still hands inside these gloves. So needless to say, he did not actually put these gloves on. He actually just let them be and carried on. These men were just starved. They were running out of ammunition. They were freezing to death. Some of them had just so much shell shock they weren't even able to function in any way, shape, or form. So as this fighting continues, the Germans are starting to think, well, if we keep going, or we get to a point, Americans have surrendered other places. We took 8,000 back in the last battle, so why wouldn't these guys surrender here too? So they sent 4 Germans with a white sheet up to the fronts and basically gave an ultimatum. If you surrender now, we'll be done. If you don't, we're going to level the city. Women, children, civilians, troops, everybody that's in here. Well, General McCulloch had one word response. He said, nuts. He basically said, you're nuts if you think we're going to surrender. Ironically, that night, that morning, the fog cleared, the clouds cleared up, and now all of a sudden the Americans are able to drop supplies to all of their troops there in the Saguenay to the front lines, getting all their supplies, ammo, food, medical supplies, warmth, things they're able to have, as well as launch the counterattack, cutting off all of the supply lines that the Germans had to supply anything to the front of this particular battle. So all of this took place by nightfall that night. So when we're given the ability to actually fight the war properly with some honor, it doesn't even take a full 24 hours for us to not only cut them off, but start to change, substantially change the terms of the war. So after that, Hitler really is defeated. And a lot of the reason that Hitler did the things that he did before this battle and even right after this battle that just flat out cost him everything, and to subsequently lose the war. This was the end of the war. The people that were closest to him talked about how he was and how he was acting, and he was just lost and didn't make sense when he talked. And his private doctor was giving him a cocktail in the morning of cocaine, basically, and another liquid that actually made heroin. So he was very much addicted to heroin, getting a dose every morning and becoming very jittery, very sporadic, very unable to be able to understand him and figure out what his plans were. So this entire Battle of the Bulge, them trying to take Antwerp, all of his generals, everybody else that was around him, they were blindly, because of the faith in Hitler and the Nazi regime, just went along with his orders. Even though they didn't believe it and they didn't think it was right and they didn't think it was going to be any good, they still went along with it just because of their faith in what Hitler was doing. That blind faith and that psychosis that Hitler had turned into, it is needless to say what caused them to finally end up losing the war, because he brought all of his troops from the Eastern Front fighting the Soviets over here to do this massive Bulge offensive to try and get Antwerp. And when we retaliated, finally, it crushed them. And now there's no troops up on the east, so the Soviets were able to get to Berlin. And so within a matter of 6 months, this one little battle, this battle that took place in December was the beginning of the demise of Hitler in the end. So the information that I got for this, the main place that I got all this from, there is a quote or two that are from Corporal Keith Davis from the 16th Field Artillery. He needs to be noted here. The fact that this particular documentary that I watched over and over and over and researched with, he was mentioned and quoted many, many times throughout this whole thing. The main work cited is from a History Channel documentary on the Battle of the Bulge. There's a handful of professors and authors that are in it. Kind of too many to be able to cite, but the overall citing is from the History Channel documentary of World War II in color. of the Battle of the Bulge. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next one.